Hey everybody, it is Matty here with Altcoin Buzz with you on this Tuesday, and today we are going over this singular piece on medium.com, a most peaceful revolution written a couple of days ago by Nic Carter. We'll give you a little bit more info on who that is in just a second, but to set the stage here, before we dive into it, we'll leave you with a couple of quotes that open up his essay. People should not be afraid of their governments. Governments should be afraid of their people. That's courtesy of V for Vendetta. You may recognize the quote. Here's another one. It's submission, Rediger murmured, the shocking and simple idea which had never been so forcefully expressed that the summit of human happiness resides in the most absolute submission. Michel Houellebecq from Soumission. So let's revisit this in just a second. I wanted to give you guys a quick snapshot first of the market on this Tuesday morning. It is up very, very marginally, 0.27% up over the last day, 265 billion total market cap, Bitcoin dominance at 69.4%. And as you can see, things are maybe a little bit up, maybe a little bit down, just kind of flat really, but Bitcoin at the time of this recording sitting at $10,230. A little bit about the author before we dive into his piece. This is not a sponsored video, but we just thought this was a great article that had been put together by Nic Carter, a partner at Castle Island Ventures and also the co-founder of coinmetrics.io. He's had a few other pieces here. They tend to be a little bit lengthy, but this one we thought was fantastic, and let's dive right into it. So make no mistake, as a Bitcoiner, you are a revolutionary. Libertarians had it all wrong. They sought to shrink the state's influence by participating in the democratic process. This has been and remains a hopeless Sisyphean task. If you're not familiar from Sisyphus, from Greek mythology, he was the one that hopelessly had to push that boulder up the hill for all of eternity and never quite made it. Always got close and never quite made it. Like Tolkien's Ungoliant, the state hungers without limit, and its most engaged constituents duly reward it with votes for more growth, receiving in exchange ever greater entitlements. Libertarians are, in a word, stuffed. Like the creeping gelatinous menace in the blob, the state grows regardless of what you throw at it. Participating in democratic processes empowers it and entrenches the orderly civic ritual as the only legitimate mode of political engagement. Bitcoiners reject this. They understand that the only winning move in politics is not to play. Now, look, caveat. This is a little bit of an extreme introduction, in my opinion. Maybe I'm not perfectly happy with the political process or even the democratic process. That doesn't mean that I would reject it outright, thereby throwing out the baby with the bathwater. I don't think the response to an imperfect system is to burn it down and to go full-on anarchy. That wouldn't be my play. That wouldn't be anywhere close to my thinking. Now, maybe you may say Nic Carter is just being hyperbolic. That's possible. However, I just wanted to provide that context before we move on. Bitcoiners chose to abandon the rules of engagement and began work on a monetary system totally outside the purview and supervision of the state, entirely without restriction. Ultimately, they anticipate a system which permits unfettered commerce, provable reserve-free banking, unlike the obscure socialized loss mess we rely on, renders capital controls obsolete, frees savers from state-sanctioned theft by inflation, which is a big one, and eventually disempowers the state entirely, shrinking its monetary toolkit. Of course, this proposition predictably enraged the state-dependent intelligentsia, the pundit class, and the press, which had backslid from its fourth estate perch as a proud critic to a feeble establishment mouthpiece. I couldn't agree more. That sums up my opinion about all the FUD that we've seen these last couple of years. A mouthpiece of the intelligentsia and of the current power structure. Absolutely. No surprise at all that Bitcoin's most hysterical critics overwhelmingly benefit from their proximity to or membership in the Beltway bureaucracy or the overseas equivalent. Academics, the beneficiaries of a rampant government-guaranteed student loan bubble, politicians and ex-politicians who time and time again manage to turn their political clout into personal wealth. Isn't that interesting? How curious. Journalists reduced to meekly passing on state messaging in a futile effort to build a moat against insurgent media startups and YouTubers with 1,000 times their clout. Economists forced to peddle Keynesian narratives for grants and tenure. Everybody just seems to be going through the motions in one last-ditch defense. And maybe that last-ditch effort, that stand, will last decades, who knows? But I agree, that is exactly what their behavior represents. Thus, met with the screeching bile of the chattering classes, Bitcoiners went from utopian tinkerers to dissidents in short order, even as the movement was still in its infancy. Check the financial pages of your newspaper of record. You will find nothing but derision and mockery, and the very occasional nod of grudging acceptance. This is for an asset class which went from zero to $200 billion in a decade, with no venture backing, no IPO, no corporate entity, an absent founder in Satoshi Nakamoto, and a purely open source body of maintainers. Quite remarkable. In the US, the government saw fit to give Ross Ulbricht 2 non-parole eligible life sentences plus 40 years for a crime of creating a free market denominated in Bitcoin. China has banned the formal exchange of bitcoins. India is mulling over legislation to make mere ownership illegal as well. And as Nic contends, the conflict has absolutely begun. We are not in the prelude to war, we are living it. Of course, war doesn't look much like the savage romps of yore, but this has been the case for a long time. Gone are the days where men nobly lined up in front of each other and fired until one side ran out of able bodies. We no longer scramble out of the trenches at the sound of a whistle to the chatter of machine guns. Open warfare is virtually obsolete. Instead, contemporary conflict consists of a melange of insurgencies, IEDs, sanctions, emotionless drone strikes, and strategic infrastructure targeting through operations like Stuxnet. Since conventional warfare has migrated to the virtual, why not rebellion too? And you may remember it's an expression that we've downplayed in recent months, but there's a reason that we began calling you all members of the Altcoin Buzz Army soldiers. Some of you didn't like that. Some of you found it disrespectful, to be fair. So again, we downplayed it. But, at least in an interpretive sense, in a non-literal sense, we are kind of soldiers in this war, because I agree, warfare is not what it used to be. It's economic. It's based on sanctions. It's around monetary policy these days. It's geopolitical. Trade wars are much more common than the real thing, were the actual violent wars. And I would say we all fill a role in terms of the monetary wars that are being waged both internationally and domestically as well. There's no doubt in my mind. And of course, just as 16th century Protestants began to question the official doctrine of indulgences and the scope of the Pope's authority, so too came to wonder a ragged bunch of nerds and cypherpunks. Is inflation really necessary? In a free market economy, should central banks really have the right to arbitrarily set the price of money? Should the state really have full discretion over one's saving and spending? Should savers really be forced to trust banks and ultimately the taxpayer to redeem and honor their savings? What does an entry in a bank's database really mean? Genuine cryptocurrencies, alternative monetary systems, really threaten the state and its hangers-on. There you go. Bitcoin is an absolutely profane development, so much so that it hardly bears contemplation. It challenges the state's most treasured privilege, its ability to finance itself through inflation and seigniorage. And isn't it interesting that those countries on this planet with the most brutal capital controls, where inflation presents the biggest problems, isn't it interesting that in those countries particularly, those represent the case studies where Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies make the most sense? And isn't it also interesting that in those countries, the use of Bitcoin and cryptocurrency by the impoverished citizens is penalized just about more than anywhere else on the planet? We're talking about countries like Venezuela, like Iran, like certain African countries that we've covered in the past. These are countries with pretty severe capital controls. And again, they penalize individuals that stray away from the authoritative system. As Nic writes, it is sometimes said that cryptocurrency competition is like outrunning a bear. You only have to outrun your slowest friend. The dollar in the US is probably not threatened by the existence of Bitcoin, but the world's couple dozen most inflationary currencies absolutely are. And of course, this revolution is not for the faint of heart. Because of the extremely high stakes, reinventing a monetary system is a profoundly unpleasant task. It takes a rational zeal and an unwavering commitment to a firm vision of the future. Given the immensity of this task and the existential threat it poses to the state, only the most committed could possibly ever hope to take up the cause successfully. And as far as the only questions that matter, here's an interesting look at some of what those are as we close out the piece. After 10 years of experimentation, misallocated capital, and hubris, we have learned valuable lessons about value accrual. The scientists and engineers mistook the monetary and political revolution for a technological one. That is not at the heart of what this is all about. Their experiments were impregnated with an insistent prescriptivism. But the most important factors in minting an entirely new monetary system from scratch are not the technical implementation details, but rather the provision of compelling answers to questions like the following. What gives you the right to mint a new currency and to have disproportionate influence over its fate? Why are you choosing to reject all of the alternatives and proposing to replace them with your own? From where do you derive your authority? How are you enshrining fairness and equality of opportunity in the distribution of this new money? How will you ensure that the system is free from corruption when even the U.S. Federal Reserve is vulnerable to political capture? Well, as you know, Bitcoin has clear answers to all these questions, and its imitators do not. Not only do they not have reasonable answers, their creators aren't even aware that these are the appropriate questions to consider. Mr. Carter then closes out his piece with a discussion of Bitcoin's success over the past decade. Because many people fail to appreciate the strength of the system, let's summarize Bitcoin's first 10 years. $1 billion has cumulatively been paid in transaction fees. Miners have cumulatively collected $14 billion in exchange for their services in securing the network. The average cost basis of all Bitcoin holders is approximately $100 billion. The market value of all outstanding Bitcoins is approximately $190 billion. The network has settled roughly $2 trillion worth of transactions. The Bitcoin network now produces 80 exahashes per second. That's 8 times 10 to the power 19 hashes. And these hashes cost about $19.8 million a day on highly specialized equipment. So you may deride Bitcoin no matter. Bitcoin will be there for you when you need it. You may not need it now. You may not need it ever. But as we plunge into a more despotic, authoritarian, and chaotic world, you may one day feel comfort knowing that the world's highest assurance wealth protection system in history is waiting patiently for you. Until then, it will keep ticking along. So that was quite the piece. There was a lot in there, including a lot that we couldn't get to, believe it or not. But again, that's courtesy of Nic Carter, so kudos to him on writing that up, a partner at Castle Island Ventures and the co-founder of coinmetrics.io. Again, this was not a sponsored piece. We just thought that was a terrific little bit of writing. So let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Do you like to bash on the system as much as Nic Carter does? Again, for me, I'm kind of halfway there. I agree with his sentiments, but some of them are a little bit extreme, at least in my opinion. So let us know your thoughts, as always, in the comments below. Let us know what you think. But that about wraps it up for today, everybody. Do be sure you are following us on all the regular social media channels and on altcoinbuzz.io. Go ahead, like, subscribe, share, hit the bell to receive notifications. If you enjoyed today's video, best of luck if you choose to invest on this Tuesday. But have a great one, everybody. And we do hope to see you again soon in our next video. Take care.